Atlanta Press Club Debates 2008, the race for the 3rd Congressional District, is brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. Here is the moderator for today's debate.
Good morning, I'm Scott Slade, host of Atlanta's Morning News on News Talk 750 WSB, and welcome to our 2008 election campaign debates originating from the studios of GPB. Today's debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. Now, let's meet the candidates facing each other in the election for the 3rd Congressional District. They are, in alphabetical order, Stephen Camp, a Newnan attorney who specializes in employment law and civil litigation, and Lynn Westmoreland, who was unable to attend the debate. He is the Republican incumbent for the 3rd Congressional District and will be represented by an empty podium. Here's the format for today's debate. In the first round, Mr. Camp will answer one question from each of our panelists. In the second round, Mr. Camp will have an opportunity to ask a question of his absent opponent. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidate. Finally, Mr. Camp will have 30 seconds to make a closing statement. Before we get started, let's meet our 3 panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Greg Bluestein, a reporter with the Associated Press. Next is Valarie Edwards, a reporter for GPB Radio. And our third panelist is Dick Pettis, editor for Insider Advantage. Now, let's get started with the debate. In the first round, Mr. Camp will have 60 seconds to answer one question from each panelist. And Greg Bluestein, you may start.
Mr. Camp, you never held public office, never run for public office. What makes you qualified to, more qualified than your opponent, Representative Westmoreland, to hold this seat in Washington?
I'm an attorney by trade. I live and work in Coweta County with my wife, Katie, and 3-year-old boy, Jack. As an employment attorney, I help people every day. That's how I make my living. People who have lost their jobs, people who come to me confused because they're working 60 hours a week and getting paid for 40. And I help small and medium-sized businesses too. I help them develop and implement policies that make sense for their businesses and make sense for their employees. When I'm in Congress, I will take that same passion, commitment, and experience helping working Georgians and go to work for all the people of the 3rd District. The people in the 3rd District deserve a congressman who is engaged, who shows up, who talks and listens to works to solve problems. And that's what I'll do for you when I'm in Washington.
Valarie Edwards, you may ask your question for Mr. Camp.
Good morning, Mr. Camp. Your campaign website indicates your support of government-sponsored faith-based programs. Some say that would lead to taxpayer support of religious ministries. How do you reconcile that with the First Amendment?
Absolutely. Faith-based programs can be a wonderful thing properly structured. And we can do that. Too often, religion and politics is used as a wedge to drive people apart, when faith really, our common bonds in faith, should be used to drive people together, to solve problems. Until I started running for Congress, I was the principal lay leader of my church in Newnan, congregation of over 500 people, and I have seen firsthand what faithful, committed folks can do, go into work to help those who face challenges in life that most of us fortunately have never faced. That's a powerful tool. People in their communities, frankly, can do jobs better than we can do in government, and we need to be encouraging that, not putting a wall there. Yes, we do have to put certain prescriptions in place, certain protections in place, so that we do not violate the First Amendment. Separation of church and state is very important, but we can do that. We shouldn't use that as an excuse not to use that tool to solve the problems in our communities.
And Dick Pettis, you may ask the final question in this first round for Stephen Camp.
Good. How would you have voted on the bailout bill or rescue bill? And do you believe that a second stimulus package is warranted? If so, what should it include or exclude?
Well, with respect to the rescue plan or bailout bill, we're at the point in our economy. People think this is about the stock market going up and down. That's a relatively small part of it. But we're at the point in our economy where folks with good credit are not going to be able to go out and get a loan to buy a car, to finance a business, to send a child to school in some cases, where businesses are not going to be able to access credit to make payroll. And we have to act. People have been arguing for weeks about whether or not this rescue plan was about saving Wall Street or protecting Main Street. The stark truth is the two are interdependent, and that's what we're finding out right now. Sometimes as an attorney, I am faced with giving folks advice on what is the best out of several bad options. And sadly, this is one of those times in our economy. When a room in your home is on fire, you don't have the luxury of standing back and hoping that fire burns itself out. You gather what you have and you put out that fire. That's what we're doing with that rescue plan, and I would have voted for it for middle-class Georgians.
That concludes round one of our questioning. It's now time for Mr. Camp to pose one question to his absent opponent.
Well, were Mr. Westmoreland here with us today, I would ask him, since you've been in Congress, you have introduced exactly 4 pieces of legislation. 1, to increase the contribution limits on PACs. 2, to commission a commemorative coin. 3, to name a post office. And 4, a resolution honoring the United Parcel Service. Could you please tell us exactly how those 4 bills that you've spent 4 years introducing in Washington have helped your constituents?
And the silence denotes the fact that your opponent is not here. Would you like to present a rebuttal for what he may or may not be likely to say? Maybe you answer that question and pose it back to him.
I'd be glad to. Mr. Westmoreland's legislative record is absolutely abysmal. He's been in office nearly 4 years. He was elected 4 years ago. He's paid a salary of $169,000 a year and has earned over $600,000 in salary in Congress. And for that, we received 4 pieces of legislation, perhaps well-meaning, but at the end of the day, he's doing a disservice to his constituents. He's not doing anything to move the ball forward in this district. I don't think he's a bad person. I do think he's an incompetent congressman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camp. That concludes our second round of questioning. For our third round, we return to our panel of journalists, and we begin this round with a question from Greg Bluestein. And Greg, before you ask that question, since we have a little time here, if any of you want to ask follow-up questions after you get your answer, I think that would be fine. So Greg, you're first.
Mr. Camp, your campaign literature contends that immigration reform has been reduced to rhetoric. Here's your chance to explain your position. How would you handle the millions of illegal immigrants that are already in the country?
Well, the first step in addressing our immigration problem is to cut off the problem at its source. In other words, to control our borders. We have to do that through a comprehensive plan, through infrastructure, through personnel, and through technology. We have to get a handle on the problem. Once we do that, we have to take bold steps to bring our illegal immigrants out of the shadows to get a handle on what actually the problem is. The stark truth is, anyone who tells you that they're going to round up 12 million folks and ship them back across the border in a single day or in a single year just is not being candid with you. And throughout my candidacy, I have believed in being candid with the American people and the people of Georgia's 3rd District. So we have to seal the borders, bring folks out of the shadows, take steps to get them, in some cases, in work visas if that's appropriate, to pay back fines, back taxes, to address the problem proactively rather than simply with rhetoric that says we're going to ship them off on buses and ship them back over the border, because that's not productive. And were Mr. Westmoreland here, I would love for him to explain his position on that.
Follow-up, Greg?
Is that support for some sort of amnesty to forgive the illegal immigrants already here?
I wouldn't call it an amnesty program at all. In some cases, there are undocumented workers and illegal immigrants here who are going to have to go home. There are some cases that's not going to be the correct solution. We're going to have to send those folks to the back of the line. They're going to have to wait their turn like everyone else. They're going to have to pay for their mistake in coming here unlawfully. And we're going to have to address it on a case-by-case basis. It's one of those issues that sounds great with a broad brush stroke. In practice, it hasn't worked for decades, and it's not working now.
Thank you, Mr. Camp. Now Valarie Edwards will ask the next question.
Thank you. Has No Child Left Behind left too many Georgia children behind?
Yes. No Child Left Behind is nothing more than a catchphrase at this point. It's been poorly funded, and it treats all children as if they all learn within the same box, the same criteria. We need a comprehensive reform in the way that we approach education in our country. It's well-meaning. We don't need to scrap it and get rid of it entirely, but when you take a program and you assume that millions of children in Georgia and around the country learn the same way, and you don't even fund that program, then you're doing your children a disservice, and that would be one of my priorities. We take a lot of pride in our universities in this country. Some of our public schools, Georgia Tech, where I went to school, the University of Georgia, University of North Carolina, and many others, they rank with or ahead of the best schools in the world. We don't take that same pride, commitment, and comprehensive approach to learning and imprint it on our K-12 public school system. That's something that we need to do, it needs to change, and we need to prepare our youngsters, our young children, and grade school children for the future, and that would be an approach I would take as a congressman.
Follow-up, Valarie, or did you get your answer?
There was a lawsuit. It's now been dismissed with regard to some of the less well-funded school districts here in the state. Some people say it's the inequitable distribution of resources that contributes to keeping Georgia in the lower 40s with regard nationwide in school rankings. Let's bring this home for Georgia children. How do we equitably distribute the resources and bring all the students up to a working level?
Well, that's one of the roles that the federal government can play in education. Education is funded primarily through the state legislature. It's the state legislature's single biggest budget item. The federal government can step in and solve some of the issues that you're talking about. We should not punish children because they grow up in a community, in a rural county in many cases, in a poor community in many cases, where they're disadvantaged by no fault of their own. And the federal government and No Child Left Behind, properly structured and properly funded, can make up some of that gap so that those children don't suffer.
And our next question comes from Dick Pettis.
You're running in a district that has a very strong Republican base. Given that, do you fully embrace the positions of your party's nominee for president? If not, what positions do you differ with him on?
I don't support all of Senator Obama's positions. I do support him for president. I believe that he brings an experience, a perspective, a vision to the people of this country that we are yearning. We're looking for leaders right now. We are looking for someone who will proactively work to solve problems, and I believe he offers that, and he offers an ability to work with both Republicans and Democrats alike. That being said, there are certain aspects of his health care package, for example, that I believe is too far a reach given the economic times that we are in right now. We need to start with insuring our children, for example, and move forward incrementally rather than as comprehensive a package as Senator Obama is offering. There's some parts of spending that's being offered that we need to take a look at in light of the current economic crisis and some hard decisions that are going to have to be made in light of the current rescue plan that's being implemented for the good of middle-class Americans, for the good of all of us. That's going to make some hard decisions as we look at what we spend money on in the next administration.
Do you agree with his position on Iraq?
I believe that the Iraqi people need to stand up and take care of their own welfare and their own security. We are spending $10 billion a month in Iraq. Iraq is sitting on a surplus of tens of billions of dollars. At the same time, our national debt has ballooned to $10 trillion in the last 8 years. As a national security matter, we need to be putting our focus in Afghanistan and some other areas that are breeding grounds of the war on terror, which is very real. But our job in Iraq needs to be to pull out, to bring back those resources to the benefit of both our war on terror and our problems here at home.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Greg Bluestein.
North Georgia is still locked in historic drought. How should the federal government respond to these conditions, and what should we as citizens do?
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers plays a big role in controlling the water supply from the river basins that affect the water wars in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. The role of the federal government and the role of a congressman, I believe, is to encourage parties to come to the table and work out a solution that works for the benefits of all of the states involved. Now, this really is a decision to be made ideally by the governors of Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. We lose if we end up in litigation that goes on for years and costs millions and millions of dollars. But what can be done at the federal level is to encourage the parties involved, the 3 states involved, to come together to forge a solution that meets the needs of Metro Atlantans, that meets the needs of our farmers and residents downstream, and meets the legitimate needs of the states of Florida and Alabama as well. So it's really a facilitating role to bring the governors of those states together to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to explain the needs of the states, and to work out a solution that doesn't end up in court. I'm an attorney, and I know that that very rarely is the best solution to these problems.
Follow up, Greg?
Yeah, what about personal responsibility? Should the government encourage legislation that would promote water conservation?
You know, look, water conservation is critically important. We're knowing right now, in light of our current energy crisis, we need to conserve in a lot of ways. We need to approach that both from a legislative standpoint where appropriate and through community education and really actions at the local and state level are more appropriate. Well, there's no doubt we need to conserve water. That's best done at a local and a state level where the officials best know the needs and the use levels of the community. There is such a thing as too much micromanaging at the federal level. We need to avoid that if we can.
And the next question comes from Valarie Edwards.
Your opponent was once asked by a reporter to recite the 10 Commandments. Do you know the 10 Commandments?
I do.
Would you mind reciting them for us?
I'd be glad to. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no graven image. Do not take the name of the Lord in vain. Thou shalt not steal. Honor your father and mother.
I'm satisfied, thank you.
Very good.
Is there a follow-up to that, or?
That was the follow-up.
That is it, okay. Thanks, Valarie. Our next question will come from Dick Pettis.
The fundraising numbers everybody looks at, and they show that the incumbent has nearly 20 times more cash than you do as the race winds down. How can you convince people that you can be successful in this race with that kind of showing?
What money can't do is give you a message. It can't put you before your voters when you need to be before your voters. As I said before, we're in the worst economic times in many ways of most of our lives here today. And I think now, more than ever, the people are yearning, they're hungering for a leader who will come out and actually listen and talk and work to solve problems. It's too easy to stand back, sit on the sidelines, and criticize what others do and offer nothing yourself to solve problems. That's not leadership. When you vote for Stephen Camp in Congress, you will not be voting for an absent congressman. You'll be voting for someone who is engaged. You'll be voting for someone who will take years of experience helping working Georgians and small businesses and go to work for you. And the people are realizing that now. The 3rd District is realizing that now. And Westmoreland's absence today, his absence throughout his 4 years in Congress, is indicative of a congressman who is collecting a paycheck but is doing nothing for his constituents.
Dick, a follow-up question?
No, I'm satisfied.
Greg Bluestein, then you get the final question.
Mr. Camp, what specific programs would you cut to help pay for the $700 billion bailout that was passed?
Well, I mentioned before, I think we're going to have to take a hard look at health care and some of the health care proposals that are being put forth by both presidential candidates. Whoever is elected president, that's one area we desperately have to address this issue. There's no doubt about that. A woman came up to me the other day in Coweta County and said she desperately wants a representative who, in her words, gets it, who understands that she and her husband have good jobs, and they still struggle every month to scrape together enough money to buy the most basic health coverage. I understand that, and we have to work to solve that. At the same time, we can't spend more money than we have. We've been doing that for years and years and years, and we've watched national debt balloon to $10 trillion. We're going to have to take a look at that, take a look at other spending as well, and we're going to have to take steps to save money where it can be saved. Our $10 billion in Iraq is one area where we can save an awful lot of money, and I would work to do that in Congress.
Thanks very much for the great questions from our panel. We've run out of time for questions, and we're now ready for a closing statement from the candidates for the 3rd Congressional District. I'd like to remind our audiences that Lynn Westmoreland was unable to attend this debate. Stephen Camp will have 30 seconds for his closing statement. Mr. Camp.
Thank you so much for watching this morning and for giving me the opportunity to speak to the voters. The cry of an incumbent is always, give us more time. Given a little more time, we'll do X, Y, and Z. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the news. We may be running out of time for good leadership in this district. Our founding fathers did a wise thing 220 years ago when they made the term of your local representative to the federal government 2 years, so that you could show and hold your representative accountable in times like this. This November, hold your representative accountable and elect me, Stephen Camp, as your next congressman. Thank you so much.
And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the general election will be held on Tuesday, November 4th. Our thanks to the candidate and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit online at www.atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived on the Press Club's website. I'm Scott Slade. Thanks for joining us for this 2008 election debate.
This program was funded in part by a grant from the late Tom Watson Brown and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.